Moving on. Okay, so we're going to cover two categories of fallacies in this chapter, chapter 5. There's fallacies that have irrelevant premises. The premises have no bearing on the truth of the conclusion. So notice these are arguments, that where they have bad logic, right? Where the premises aren't actually supporting the conclusion, because in these cases, they're just not relevant, right, to what the argument is purporting to establish. In category 2 fallacies, they are fallacies that have unacceptable premises. So they're going to have premises that are false. They're relevant, right, but they are nonetheless dubious. And so today we're going to cover just category 1 fallacies, fallacies that have irrelevant premises. And the first one is a genetic fallacy. And this is where you argue for a claim as being either true or false just because of where it came from, just because of its origin. So, when you see the word genetic, right, I mean, the word that should come up is, is source, right, or genesis, right, the origin of it. There's an example that we have on there, right? We should reject a proposal for solving the current welfare mess. It comes straight from the Democratic Party. This would be somebody who's an anti-Democrat or Republican, right? So somebody who's involved in partisan politics. They're saying that, well, just because the Democrats came up with a proposal, that's a bad source. So anything that comes from there, is just has to be wrong. It's false. Now, some other examples of this that are sort of interesting, are where this is applied, to the value of religions, right, or the truth of religions, right. So sometimes, you have people say, well, look, Islam, arose from the sword, and so nothing good can come, from the sword, right. So it must be a false religion, or there's no value in it because it had, a violent origin. So, that would be a fallacy. That would be the genetic fallacy, right? The value of a religion, it doesn't isn't purely a function of its origin, right? It might have something, to do with its value now, but the value of it is going to be found in, in the function that it's playing in the lives of people now. Is it bearing good fruit now, right? That would be a proper way of assessing the value of a religion. Also, with regards to spiritual experiences, whenever individuals have spiritual experiences, typically there's, a cognitive component to it. And, the person feels, for instance, like they're being acted upon, right, by an external agency. So they, attribute, the agency to God. God is acting on them. Okay, well, you might have somebody say, well, look, that's just all sort of, firings of neurons in the brain. That's all it is. So it's false, right? The statement that something is acting on the person having the spiritual experience is God, right, is false because it originates in the brain. So those are examples of genetic fallacy domains, where the genetic fallacy might come up. Okay, now there's two arguments here that are sort of there. We got to take these as a pair. So there's what are called fallacies of composition and fallacies of division. These are arguments where there's an attribution of a feature, right? Any property, right? A feature or a property or an attribute that you apply to parts, and then you apply to a whole, or you do it the other way, right? You apply a feature to a whole, and then you apply it to its parts. So composition, right, is where you move from parts to whole. So think, just composing, when you think of the terminology, right, composition, right, you compose a whole out of parts. So you begin with parts and you end with wholes. And so, for instance, there's, let me just say that, it's arguing that what is true of the parts must be true of the whole, right? So you're arguing that, some feature applies to the parts. Therefore, it is true that some feature applies to the whole. So atoms that make up the human body are invisible. Therefore, the human body is invisible, right? Notice, the atoms, right? They are the parts that make up the whole of the human body. You're attributing a feature to the parts of the body, right? Indivisibility to the atoms, and then you transfer that property to the whole. You could say the same thing about this cup, right? It's made up of invisible atoms, right? The parts are invisible atoms. I mean, we know that's true, right? I mean, we know that material stuff is made out of atoms, so it's all invisible. So all the parts of the cup are invisible. Therefore, the whole must be invisible. So that would be a fallacy of composition. You can also use this in relation to players, right? A team, right? So say, there's a team made of great players. So take any, set of, legendary players, Larry Bird, Michael Jordan, LeBron James, Magic Johnson, Isaiah Thomas. Okay, now imagine you sort of, make a team out of them, right? All-star team. Oh, that's a team of great players. Therefore, that whole team is great. That would be a fallacy of composition. Now, the reason why it would be a fallacy of composition is because the conclusion may actually be false, right? You can conceive of the conclusion being false, rather easily, right? I mean, you might account for the absence of greatness in the whole by virtue of, a lack of chemistry, between the players, not enough complementarity, right? They all, sort of maybe you have, a team of Shaqs, right? Shaquille O'Neal, 5 players or 5 great players. They wouldn't make for a great team, though. Okay, so that's a fallacy of composition. Okay, a fallacy of division works the other way. It's where you attribute, feature to a whole, and then you divide it, okay, into the parts, right? So you say, some part has a feature, therefore, some whole has a feature, therefore, its parts must have the same feature. So, this machine is heavy. So there's a laptop in front of me, right? It's kind of heavy because it has an older LCD on it, touchscreen LCD. So it's relatively heavy. Therefore, all the parts of this machine are heavy. And that's false because, if you take one part off, I mean, it's not going to be heavy, right? It's going to be light, relatively speaking. So the conclusion, can be false, even though the premise is true. Take a large crowd of protesters. Say you have 500,000 protesters, in Los Angeles. And then you go on to say, this is a large crowd, this whole is large. Therefore, each part of it is large. Each protester is large. That would be a fallacy of division. Okay, the next type is appeal to the person, and this one is going to have different varieties to it. As we see there on the bottom, there's types. An appeal to the person is what's called an ad hominem argument, and literally it means to the man, right? So it's Latin for to the man, and so it's what you have is an argument that attacks the person making another argument, right? It rejects a claim by criticizing the person who makes it rather than the claim itself. So, we should reject Chen's argument for life on other planets. He dabbles in the paranormal. This argument is attacking the person. It is an irrelevant premise, right? One thing that's common between all these arguments, right, is they're fallacies of irrelevance. So you should see how, the premise is irrelevant. So look, Chen is arguing, that there's life on other planets. That's false. Why? Because he dabbles in the paranormal. Because he's weird, right? He's got this, weird fascination with the paranormal. Anything that comes from this guy must be false, right? So, so it's addressing the person, rather than the substance of the argument. Now, the argument itself, might be true or false. Actually, theoretical physicists, I guess, believe that it's almost a certainty, that there's life on other planets. So the way to address that argument would be on its substance, right? Through its own merits, rather than on the basis, of the merits of the person who's making it, merits, that have nothing to do with the argument. So the varieties of it are as follows. There's what's called a personal attack. This is where you sort of heap verbal abuse on somebody. And this one seems like it's a personal attack. But a more direct one would be something like this. Look, Bill Maher says that all religions are ridiculous. He made the movie Religulous, right? He believes they're all false and, like Stone Age beliefs. But look, Bill Maher is a pig, a liberal pig on top of that. So, anything that he says must be false. So, it's false that religions are ridiculous. Bill Maher said it. That's a personal attack. Circumstances. Appeal to circumstances are where something is, some claim that somebody's making is explained away by the circumstances, of the person. So, for instance, there's, I mentioned examples like this before. There's actually some researchers that have been hired by the alcohol industry in the past to produce studies, that alcohol is safe. So, imagine, just arguing against one of those studies, right? Saying, well, look, no wonder this guy is making that claim that alcohol is safe. He's being paid by the alcohol industry. So it's false. That would be an appeal to circumstances. We do it all the time, right? I mean, but, you got to notice that it's a fallacy because the premises are irrelevant to the conclusion, right? In order to actually, make a relevant consideration against, the safetyness of alcohol, we'd have to do that, on the substance, right? Show, some independent research or studies, that establishes that, not by, or by just pointing out, that the person is being paid, by the alcohol industry. And at the same time, though, we also want to keep in mind some of the stuff we said about expertise, in chapter 4. If they're being paid, then they're biased, right? So we have reason to doubt what they're saying because they have a bias, right? But strictly speaking, if we argue against their claim, that on the basis of their circumstances, that would be a fallacy. Tu quo qui, that's how you pronounce this funny looking word. It's Latin, and it means you too. So these kinds of arguments point out hypocrisy in people and reject their claims on the basis of that perceived hypocrisy. So look, Bill Clinton, when he was president, right? Imagine he had gone, on national television, and said, "Oh, we all got to eat healthy. We got to sort of cut out, these French fries that we eat, and these hamburgers, and we have to eat our vegetables." Next day, Bill Clinton, is jogging, and he stops by McDonald's to buy some French fries. This is actually something that happened. Well, you might say, well, look, what a hypocrite. You too are engaged in these, bad eating habits, and you're telling us, to eat healthy. We ought to reject your claim, because you're a hypocrite. That's a tu quo qui kind of argument. Poisoning the well is when, you try to establish that the source would produce nothing but falsehoods, or or has these motivations that are questionable, and so anything that they say, is bound to be false or can be taken to be false. Now, for this one, you want to think about, what lawyers do to witnesses, right? On the opposing side. So if there's a witness that they want to discredit, they'll say, oh, this person, is a liar, right? A documented liar. He lied in court, he perjured, and, he's been known to lie to his family and whatnot. So you can't believe anything that comes out of this person's mouth. That's poisoning the well. Okay, I'm just having to look here to see who else showed up. Got about 10 people now. Okay, the next one is going to be the fallacy of equivocation. This is where there's an argument that whose conclusion depends on some equivocation, in the word. Now, what does equivocation mean? Can somebody tell me what equivocation means? Unmute yourself to do that. Nobody knows what equivocation means. Okay, well, I'll just go ahead and tell you. It is equivocation is where you have some ambiguity there, right? If you say something equivocal, right, it means that it's subject to multiple interpretations, right? So there's an ambiguity there, and it's vague because of that ambiguity. So there's going to be two different senses that some word is used in an argument in a fallacy of equivocation. So here's one example. Only man is rational, no woman is a man. Therefore, no woman is irrational. Now, whenever you have these arguments, you should be able to see that that the senses, in which the words are used, right? So in this case, there's the word man in the first and the second sentence. So in the first sentence, it means something like humankind, right? This old-fashioned way of referring to humankind. So only humans are rational, right? That's what the first sentence is saying. The second sentence is saying, well, no woman is, a man. So among the species, right, women are women, and there's no woman that is a man. It's using sort of man, in the male sense, in the gender, or anatomical sense, right? So they're saying two different things in each of these sentences, right? And then the conclusion is dependent, on the ambiguity. So then it goes on to say that no woman is rational. Let me see. There's a couple of more examples I can give here on that. So right, triangles are obtuse. Whatever is obtuse is stupid, right? Therefore, triangles are stupid. Okay, so who can tell me what obtuse to this sense over here means in the first sentence?
It means an angle's over 90 degrees.
Angles over 90, yeah, an angle over 90 degrees. There you go. So Nathan, thank you. And so that's what it means in this first sentence. In the second sentence, it's an adjective that's applied to human beings, right? So when you're obtuse, you're seen as, being stupid or dumb. So so there's an ambiguity here, right? Two different senses which the word has in each sentence, and that makes it a fallacy of equivocation. Here's another one. Um, all laws can be changed by humans. We're going to have two different senses of laws here. And, the form of this argument is just fine. You don't actually have to have, the two words, premises and then, something else in the conclusion. You can actually have, the word in a premise and a conclusion. So laws here, means, laws that are man-made conventions, right? Conventions that or institutes that are passed by legislatures. And then what we're talking about here is something that is not man-made, something that that we see, the regularities that we see in nature. So there are two different senses of law that are that are at play in each of these sentences, and the conclusion is dependent on that ambiguity. Okay, so then next one is a appeal to popularity, and The only form you're going to get, in this text is what, something like the bandwagon, what's called the bandwagon argument. So that one says, it has this form, look, everybody's doing such and such, therefore you should be doing such and such, right? So everybody's on the Atkins diet now, right? So you should be on the Atkins diet. There was, an NPR public announcement once which said, "Oh, look, millions of people have taken this survey on fire safety. Join the millions and get the survey done." Right. Well, get on the bandwagon, right? You should do this because everybody else is doing it. And I, being the contrarian, said, "Hell no, I'm not going to do what everybody else is doing. I'm going to do my own thing." Um, that would be. It is an appeal to popularity, though, and you're only going to get, like I said, one variety, the bandwagon variety. There is another one, I guess I should say. I saw another one in the text. It's what's called an appeal to vanity. So an appeal to vanity would be where you're appealing to what the people would think in relation to somebody who's glamorous, right? They would sort of admire, worship, somebody like J Lo, right? And say, well, look, J Lo is using this makeup here. So if you want to be admired like J Lo, you should use J Lo's makeup, right? So that's a sort of an indirect appeal to popularity. Okay, so appeal to tradition would be where a person is arguing that because something has been done in this fashion for a long time immemorial, even, right? Say it should be done, continue to be done that way, right? That's an appeal to tradition. There was actually an appeal to tradition made recently on behalf of baseball. So there's a purist of baseball, right? They point out and they emphasize, that baseball. Look, these rules have been, have been in play for the duration of the existence of baseball, right? They existed at the very beginning, and they haven't been changed. So we can't change them now. There are people who want to change the rules of baseball because it's becoming less popular, so they want to sort of make it more exciting for people in order to draw in more of a fan base. So those purists are saying, look, no, we can't change it because this is the way that baseball has been done since the very beginning. It would be wrong to change it. Right? So that's an appeal to tradition. An appeal to ignorance is
I have
where
a question about
yeah,
appeal
go
to
ahead.
tradition.
Uh-huh.
So what if someone is making an argument about like these specific rules are what are fundamental to the game of baseball? And what
Mm-hmm.
if they say that because they're fundamental and that they've always been like that, um, that those rules shouldn't change?
Yeah, well, there's probably a couple of different considerations there, right? I mean, you did make an appeal to tradition in that argument, right? So you said, oh, it's been this way, so it can't change. Another argument, which is based on a different consideration. I think it would be like an independent premise, right? You'd want to sort of develop both of those as independent premises if you're going to make that kind of argument. It would be something like, look, we can't change the rules too much because if we change the rules too much, it's not going to be baseball anymore, right? We have to. But that leaves a lot of leeway, though. Obviously, right? I mean, somebody who's on the reformist side might say, "Oh, you're right. We can, we won't want to change it too much, but there's some things we can do to change baseball and keep it as baseball." But if there's a set of rules that somebody proposes, and then your response might be, well, that just changes it too much, right? It's not going to be baseball anymore. So that would be an independent consideration. I don't think it would be an appeal to tradition. And and it might be a valid one, right? I mean, you don't want to. It depends. You have to look at the merits of the argument and consider it. Okay, does that address that, Nathan?
Oh yeah, I think I was muted. That's
Okay.
good.
Okay, appeal to ignorance is where you argue that something is either true or false because you don't have evidence either way, right? There's a lack of evidence. So this slogan should be kept in mind here. Um, Actually, I can clear. Okay, so this slogan here, I'm sure you've heard it. Um, the absence of evidence. Okay, the absence of evidence is not the evidence of absence, right? So, you know, you might say, well, um, there is no evidence that God exists. Therefore, he doesn't exist. Why did I say he? God doesn't exist. It doesn't exist, or whatever it is, doesn't exist. Okay, so that's an appeal to ignorance. Now, that's one form of a appeal to ignorance. It can also be used to, you know, the absence of evidence can actually also be used to argue for a positive claim. So, you know, this one here, you know, is the one I just gave you, right? And the slogan actually pertains to this one right here, right? X is true because X hasn't been shown to be false, right? No one has shown that ghosts aren't real, so they actually. I'm sorry, it's not that one. It's let me see. It is this one right here. X is false because X hasn't been shown to be true. You know, X. So God doesn't exist because, you know, there's no evidence for it. No one has shown that ghosts are real, right? So they must not exist. But you can also, you know, argue for a positive claim, as I mentioned. So you might say, well, you know, you might take that very same argument about God, right? It's like, no, nobody's, you know, disproved that God exists, therefore he exists. So X might be argued to be true because, you know, X hasn't been shown to be false. No one has shown that ghosts aren't real, so they must be real. Anyways, so either in an appeal to ignorance, you're moving from an absence of evidence to either, you know, asserting a positive claim, right, or you know, denying that something exists as a result of the absence of evidence. You know, and this brings up, you know, this idea of the burden of proof. This is a very important one, right? When we are engaged in rhetoric and debate, you know, when somebody makes a positive claim, or if somebody, you know, denies, you know, the positive existence of something, where's the burden of proof? Who has the burden of proof, right? Who is it incumbent upon to produce, you know, evidence for their assertion? So the burden of proof is the weight of argument or evidence required by one side in a debate or disagreement. So, you know, no one has shown that gremlins aren't real, right? So they must be real, right? There's a positive sort of assertion being made there. And now notice that argument actually places the burden of proof on others to show that they aren't real, right? So it's saying, look, I'm entitled to my belief that gremlins aren't real because you haven't shown that they're not real. Right. Well, that mistakenly places the burden of proof on them, right? So the burden of proof is actually on the person who's making positive assertions. So the person who, you know, believes that gremlins are real has the burden of proof to show that they are real, right? He has the burden of proof to produce the evidence, the burden of producing the evidence. And in general, the side that makes a positive claim has that burden. So whenever, you know, you are engaged in debate, you know, look for the positive claim, look to see who's making the positive claim. And if they are, you know, insisting that others, you know, have to produce the evidence or provide a proof, you know, that they are what they're believing is false, and they're mistakenly placing the burden of proof on the others, actually the burden of proof is on them. Okay, so now we come next to appeal to emotion, and this is when you use the emotions as premises in an argument. You know, take our example here. You should hire me for this position. I'm the best person for the job, right? If I don't get this job, you know, My wife is going to leave me. I won't have a retirement. I need the income, to buy this house. Look, I have a child to pay, that I have to raise. So I need this job. I'm the best person for the job. So, in that case, you're using sort of an appeal to pity, right? It's an appeal to emotion. Um, Socrates in the Plato's dialogues, right, in the trial specifically, he said that look, people usually come into this court of law when they are alleged of something, and they'll bring their whole family, and their children and their wives, and and they'll all be crying in front of you, pleading for you not to, convict their father or their husband or whatever, So there's always an appeal to pity that you get from people, who you bring into this court of law, but you're not going to get that from me, right? So, anyways, it's an appeal to pity when that sort of thing is done. Now, apple polishing is another kind, and that's where you sort of you use flattery, right, to get somebody to do something, or to accept a belief. So look, a politician might say, "Oh, I know you're going to vote for me because you believe in the American dream. I'm all about the American dream, right? And I know you're a good American, and we need to get this, American dream back, you know. I know you're going to vote for me. Apple polishing. Okay. Scare tactics is like fear mongering, right? It's when fear is used to get a person or a populace to accept a conclusion. So I'll give you an example. In the lead up to the Iraq War, Condoleezza Rice said that um, either we go in and invade Iraq, or we wait for the smoking gun in the form of a mushroom cloud. The second clause was referring to evidence that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction, right? So she's saying, look, we don't have a smoking gun evidence that they do, but I mean, if we don't go in now, though, they may nuke us because they may have those weapons. So either we go in and invade Iraq, or we wait for the smoking gun in the form of the mushroom cloud. So we obviously don't want to get nuked, so we're going to go in and invade Iraq. That would be a scare tactic. Fear mongering, right, is another word I think that is really apt. I'm going to show you a video here. This is pretty extreme, but it's a form of scare tactic. This is actually what's called a Daisy ad, and I'm gonna let you watch this and then comment upon it. Okay, is everybody seeing that video?
From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Vote for President Johnson on November 3rd. The stakes are too high for you to stay home.
Okay, was everybody able to see that?
This has been a presentation.
Yeah, I saw that.
Okay, good. Let's see. Okay, so that is a scare tactic, right? That's actually from, we think our political discourse is over the top now, but I mean, imagine that was in 64 when Lyndon Johnson was running against Barry Goldwater, and Barry Goldwater was seen as an extremist, who he was sort of like John Bolton type, very sort of aggressive in their international relations. So he was perceived as somebody who would cause a nuclear war, at a time when people were fearing a nuclear holocaust. And so Johnson ran that ad, but he only ran it a couple times, right? It was so extreme that that he had to just take it off. But that's a scare tactic, and let's see, what do you think about that? How is that? Does that seem extreme to you all as a political ad? Let's see, we have some chats here, so let me bring it up. Where is the chat? Okay, I was not expecting. Alejandra said, okay, so Alejandra said I was not expecting an explosion. Two said I was say it's too much. I should have probably given you a disclaimer, trigger warning. It's pretty extreme. We have a yeah, it's funny because it's so dramatic, Aja. Yeah, it's kind of funny. Like we have we have scare tactics these days as well. During the 2018 I'm sorry, the 2008 primary, Hillary against Obama, right? Hillary ran an ad. It was called like the 3 a.m. ad, and it showed her, being very presidential, sort of answering the phone when there was some crisis abroad, and you know, and the suggestion was that, look, you don't want somebody here who's like a neophyte, right? Somebody who's green, who hasn't had any experience in international relations. You want somebody like me, who's going to be able to take care of things. If you have somebody like Obama, who knows what you'll get, right? So so that's a scare tactic. Okay, now we're moving on to the next type of argument, and that's a red herring. Now, a red herring. Before actually getting into the argument, let's think about the image, right? The metaphor. It is actually used. A red herring is used to train hound dogs. So what they'll do is they'll put 2 cents. Give the hound dog 2 cents, right? The first one is actually the right scent, right? And so it's the one they're supposed to follow. And then they introduce a red herring, which is a smoky fish, and it's supposed to be a distraction from the proper scent, the original scent. And so the good hound dogs will go after the original scent. The bad hound dogs will go after the red herring. So in argument, it's sort of distraction that's that's raised by somebody who's trying to distort things. I mean, so what happens in a red herring is that some irrelevant issue is brought up, or it's like a change of topic even, right? It sort of is only slightly continuous, a very subtle change, right? So you have to sort of see that there is, but you do have to see that there's a difference in topic between what you have in the premise and what you have in the conclusion. So it's a deliberate raising of an irrelevant issue during an argument. The argument does change the subject. So let's look at this argument here, right? Every woman should have the right to an abortion on demand. There's no question about it. These anti-abortion activists block the entrances to abortion clinic, threaten abortion doctors, and intimidate anyone who wants to terminate a pregnancy. That's a red herring because look, there's in the conclusion you have a claim, right, that a woman should have the right to an abortion, right, on demand. In the premise, what you have are considerations that are different, right? It's sort of irrelevant to the conclusion, so irrelevant that it's like a change in the topic. What's being talked about is in the premises are, the inconveniences that arise as a result of the activities of anti-abortion activists. Two different things, okay? So that's a red herring. Okay, now a straw man, it's related, but it's a little bit different. So a straw man is where, you stay on topic, the person stays on topic, but they actually sort of, provide a distorted set of considerations for a conclusion. So what they do is, there's some other arguer, right, has some conclusion, right? And then, there's another, second person who creates a straw man, right? A bad argument for the conclusion. And then they topple the straw man. That's the image, right? You topple the straw man is easy to tear down, right? And when you tear down the straw man, you take the conclusion, the consideration that it's supporting to be shown to be false or whatever it is, right? So the distorting, weakening, or oversimplifying of someone's position so it can be more easily attacked or refuted. Now, here's an example. Senator Kennedy is opposed to the military spending bill, saying that it's too costly. Why does he always want to slash everything to the bone? He wants a pint-sized military that can fight off a crazed band of terrorists, let alone a rogue nation. So, here's the conclusion here, right, is that Kennedy is opposed to the military spending bill. And he says that it's too costly, right? Saying that it's too costly. That's why. Okay, now, why does he always want to slash everything to the bone, right? He's, what he wants is a military, that is, a ragtag, disarmed bunch of people, or, he wants them with, to arm them with pitchforks and sticks and stones and whatnot. Why does he want that, right? So that's a straw man, right? Straw men are easily detectable, right? I mean, they're sort of ridiculous considerations in support of an argument. This one here is ridiculous because there might be tons of good reasons why Kennedy might be opposed to the military spending bill, like that, well, hey, look, there's just too much military spending in proportion to spending on education, right? We need a balance. Or maybe, there's funding in there, because it's going to be used on a war that he disagrees with, right? So all kinds of legitimate reasons might be appealed to, in order to explain why it is that he's opposed to the military spending bill. Okay, so our last one is going to be two wrongs make a right. This is a fallacy, right? So, say, your spouse has an affair, and then you say, you know what, they had an affair, so I'm within my rights, to go have my own affair. I'm right to have an affair, right? They had an affair. So, that is, the fallacy of two wrongs make a right. Should you have an affair? Should you cheat on your spouse? What's going to determine, whether you should or not, right, is definitely not going to be, what your spouse did, in terms, on the same score. They did end up having an affair. That doesn't mean you should have an affair. Let's see. So it's arguing that you're doing something morally wrong is justified because someone else has done the same or similar thing. Actually, there was this was something that happened, that could be applied to the political situation in 2016. So then, it was the last years of Obama's presidency, and Mitch McConnell denied him his Supreme Court nominee, right? He should, Mitch McConnell just kept stalling, and stole a Supreme Court position by waiting, after the election. So, that was wrong. Constitutionally, it was wrong. And some Democrats were saying, oh, we ought to do the same thing, when we, come to power, and, or even, they did that. They were trying to do that, but they didn't have the power to do it. But they were arguing that, look, they did this in the 2016. It's right to do the same thing right now because they did it then. And, that would be two wrongs making a right. Okay, so that's it for this. Did you? We have like 20 minutes. We could go over some of the homework if you want to do that. What do folks feel like doing? I have the text here, so I can just bring it up. Let me see. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and we have to do 5.2 for this. Let me show you what these look like. This is actually what's going to look like on the exam too. It's going to Well, it's going to be similar. I mean, you're going to have like just the passage, and then in the exam, you'll have like a range of options, right? Tell me which fallacy this falls under. So here, you're given all the fallacies, up here. Um, there's a genetic fallacy, composition, division, appeal to the person, equivocation, appeal to popularity, appeal to tradition, appeal to ignorance. So it's exhaustive. It includes all the stuff we just covered. So let's look at the first one here. Okay, look at this passage here and tell me what do you think it is? Seeing that the eye and hand and foot in every one of our members has some obvious function, must we not believe that in like manner a human being has a function over and above these particular functions?
Oh, what is it? Not division, but
Uh-huh.
what was the other name?
Composition.
Composition.
There you go. It's composition, yeah. And what Aristotle is doing there is he's saying, look, the parts of a human being have a function, right? The hand, the eye, and the foot, they all have their proper functions. So therefore, the whole human being has a function, right? So he's attributing a feature of the parts that has a function and saying the whole has a function, right? And that's a fallacy of composition. Okay, what about the next one here? The New York Times reported that 1/3 of Republican senators have been guilty of Senate ethics violations, but that's false. The Times is a notorious liberal rag.
Is that genetic?
Genetic, yeah, it's genetic. Now you might think one other possibility, right, said it's an appeal to the person. But the reason I think it's not in this case is because it's referring to an institution. I mean, I don't. I guess you could probably make an argument that it is an appeal to the person. But I think the most appropriate one would probably be the genetic fallacy. Okay, hold on one second here. Let me figure out how to turn the page. Okay, what? Oh, I see. Okay, so moving on to the next one. Geraldo, no, I'm sorry, number 10. Kelly says that women who live predominantly in Muslim countries are discriminated against, but how the heck would she know? She's not a Muslim. What do y'all think? If you want to take a stab at it in the chat room, feel free to. You can just sort of type something in there. Make sure if you chat that you're chatting to everyone. Okay, I think somebody might have chatted to me privately, but where it says :2:, then it should say everyone. If you have a name on there, and that it's just chatting privately. Okay, so this one here is going to be an appeal to circumstances. Okay, so it's sort of saying so it's an appeal to the person. And it's appealing to her circumstances, right? Like saying, well, look, she doesn't even know. Look, she has no idea what she's talking about. Okay. Let's see, let's do number 19. The former mayor was convicted of drug possession and he spent time in jail. So you can safely ignore anything he has to say about legalizing drugs.
Which number are we on?
Number 19. So the former mayor was convicted of drug possession and he spent time in jail. So you can safely ignore anything he has to say about legalizing drugs.
Is this one also appeal to person or ad hominem or?
It is, yeah, no, it is, yeah, and it's a particular variety. So this one you can see, right, that it's a poisoning of the well. Remember that? Yeah, and so Aja also said it. So yeah, it's an appeal to the person, poisoning of the well. So in the exam, you'll just probably have an appeal to the person. It'll cover all four varieties. Let's do number 16 here. So okay, why did it do that? Gremlins exist, that's for sure. No scientist has ever proved that they don't exist. What type of fallacy is that?
Appeal to ignorance.
Appeal to ignorance. There you go. Okay, so let's see. Let me. How about number 9? The Prime Minister is lying about his intelligence briefings since almost everyone surveyed in national polls thinks he's lying.
Oh, is this appeal to popularity?
Appeal to popularity, yeah. So saying, look, everybody believes this, therefore it must be true. That would be
That's
appeal to
just-
popularity.